Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take this chance to welcome you back to my presentation. I am Professor Oriaso Odongo, and my channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo Knowledge Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you today about climate change economics. And one great question I want to ask, which is why I'm presenting this: why does climate change concern economists? What is economic in climate change that would warrant effort or attention of economists? And who are these economists, for example? I want to start by saying that climate change is real, and we have seen a lot of evidence from scientific bodies of knowledge, and so that it remains not questionable. And what is also not questionable at the moment is that climate change is a great deal caused by human activities. If you look at those that we are calling anthropogenic means, the human activities as it were. And what also is now clearer is that climate change is a result of global warming, and the global warming is as a result of a high concentration of greenhouse gases or heat-trapping gases or ozone-depleting substances that we have talked about in the atmosphere. And we know very well that climate change is as a result of a number of things. If you check through your economy, a number of things. If you read Stern 2006, for example, it tries to document the causes of climate change in different economies, and he comes up with certain parameters. And he says that climate change can have sources from electricity generation, for example, energy sources. So all energy sources. So what percentage contribution do they have to greenhouse gases? What about land use changes? So they talk about energy sources constituting over 20%. And the land use changes like deforestation. If you were to do deforestation, you have around 15% going onwards. And what about in agriculture? Look at soil and livestock. Look at that. So it's around 12%. And look at the transport sector, as it were. So I mentioned somewhere in my previous presentations about the contribution of the transport sector. So around between 8 to 10%. And then look at industry, around 10%. And then we look at other sources. So other sources together can be around 4 to 6%. So this tells you that climate change is a product of the various sectors, particularly with regard to all these things I'm really mentioning here. And so climate change has impact. I think I've been able to make that presentation previously. They are just long-term impacts, and the long-term impacts that we have been able to note include biodiversity loss, sea level rises. I think we have mentioned this, severe and extreme drought, and weather events that we have been able to mention. So if the business as usual behavior remains, then I continue to say that things get worse. So the problem of climate change is very global. But I just mentioned that much as it is global, and so it requires collective understanding, collective interventions. Even at local level, we require such kind of initiative, such kind of thinking. And we know that climate change has got very direct relationship with growth and development. When I presented about the relationship between climate change and development, that came out very clearly. So there is a direct relationship. The economic policies and measures are therefore supposed to be in place. So, and that is the essence of the economies now. So economic policies, so what are they about? Measures that are put in place to safeguard things or to deal with the costs and the impacts that we are talking about. So then the great attraction of economists into climate change was a result of the previous initial studies that gave evidence to climate change. If you look at the IPCC reports, If you look at the United Nations General Assembly and the thinking around the agency of climate change, if you look at World Meteorological Association and the initial research that they presented, which was then captured in UNFCCC and even the Kyoto Protocol and the issues that I just mentioned about the Paris Agreement. So according to UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol, which are international bodies, there are issues here. There are issues that are supposed to be isolated so that we quickly see how economists come into this matter. So there is evidence that the rich and developed nations continue to dominate emissions. And I think I may be wrong at the moment. Look at countries that want to be developed. They also actively using energy sources, and some of these energy sources are exuding tons of carbon into the atmosphere. So we may not restrict this kind of thinking to put responsibility on rich and developed countries. Without mitigation efforts, emissions will rise very strongly, and it will be very difficult to reverse it. So you see now, we sit pretty and wait for something to get worse. And if it does, then the gains that we have made with regard to development might just be washed away that way if we don't act. Emissions from developing countries are actually coming. They are projected to rise sharply. So I gave you an example with the development, the national development approaches we're having a county system where every local town is quickly being upgraded to a municipality and a city, and you can see the impact that has with regard to greenhouse gas and exuding of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, for example. The inclusive policy decisions which need to guide various response strategies are supposed to be also checked. So then the nature of climate economics. So what would a very good, or what would climate economic look like? For example, what's the nature? And climate economics, being a relatively new thinking, is not as new as we thought. So even when climate change was founded, for example, let's say that it was shown that climate change was happening rapidly. A lot of things, global warming, and the politics around global warming, and then came the economics of global warming. So initially we had the economics of global warming, just like we had the politics of global warming. And so we're looking at this kind of economics, and we're calling it economics of climate change, that it involves also assessing policies of global warming. So what policies are in place? So if there is supposed to be any economics of climate change, then it has to revolve around global warming, as it were. So it is because global warming has a lot of uncertainty. Many scholars have come up with scenarios and models, and these are largely economists. These models are able to even predict future environmental, social, and economic projections that we are having. They are even able to quantify the impacts of climate change and even make them amenable for monetary descriptions that we are talking about. So the main policy-based resources that we are having, look at all that, like mitigation and adaptations and all those geoengineering processes are there, and economists tend to really work around that with regard to deciphering or getting us to settle down on which measures are most cost-effective, which measures are going to really lead to mitigations proper, and all those kind of things. So the impacts of climate change have quickly changed to costs of climate change, so that they can reflect the economic burden that climate change has on nations and population and even the global community. So the cost of climate change involves, for example, let's say costs in mitigation. So I was talking about cost in mitigation. If you roll down all those mitigational measures, particularly per sector, let's say population sector, or social service sector, or you look at it in the urban planning sector, you look at it in the transport sector, and all those sectors, and you were to roll out mitigation measures. So the cost of that is supposed to be concerning economists. Economists, they have responsibility to be able to provide advice in terms of having done analysis, like cost-benefit analysis, of putting in place a certain mechanism or measure to mitigate climate change. So the costing climate change is a bit difficult at the moment, simply because climate change, just like I've been able to mention, is a global phenomenon. But we can do this if you look at the local, national, within a very definite jurisdiction, something like that. The environmental factors that we are talking about, climate being one of them, involves externalities, and there are many agents of greenhouse production or something like that. So making it becoming a difficult venture. But within one government, climate change costing challenge can be resolved easily, so that it doesn't become something that brings uncertainty like it does within maybe regional or international. You can use, for example, those strategies I mentioned, like taxation of the emitter. If you can bring carbon taxation that we had talked about, or you allocate property rights with trading, or you can have direct regulation around that. Maybe mainstreaming climate change policies into our national and constitutions and statutes that we are having, so that we can check issues around mitigation and adaptation. So the challenge is that we look at the global and the fact that we have many jurisdictions and sometimes poor representations that are causing some problem with this kind of implementation. So within national, I think it's quite possible. So then we look at the scope of climate economics. So where does climate economics extend? So it's supposed to establish the cost-effective means, or the cheapest means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, for example. So what is the most effective and cheapest means of doing that, reducing that? Is it using those ones I mentioned? Remember, if we were to shift to clean or to renewable energy sources, for example. So would it be more cost-effective? What about if we launch a full-scale mitigation strategy like geoengineering? What would be the cost of it? So economists are there to advise us. So which is the most cost-effective and cheapest means to reduce greenhouse gas emission, for example. They also establish the effective way of reducing the impact of climate change. So they do that. So then they also develop projections and scenarios. They use modeling to be able to do all this. So apart from it being just around the cost-effective way of reducing emission, apart from it just revolving around reducing impact of climate change, it goes into also the cost of making those projections that we're talking about, coming up with those scenarios and modeling that will really involve climate-sensitive planning. It also goes to developing sustainable global, regional, and national economic policies. So look at the policies that we are having. I previously talked about those policies. And can you imagine, for us to be able to sustain them and then develop ideas, new ideas and innovations, we can rely on technology that we are having at the moment. And then we also use it to compare the differentials, the different economic policies that are deployed, and then the factors that make us to deploy them. And then we also use the economics to quantify the socioeconomic impacts of climate change. So how does climate change impact? So are we able to put that impact into cost and be able to assign numericals to it so that we understand it? So then reducing cost of climate change requires an effective and very relevant economics. So it's not just an economics that is not well designed to be able to deal with the matters. But we know that we require a more or less comprehensive economics that is able to establish costs of reducing global greenhouse gas, economics that is going to help advise us on how to reduce the impact, all those ones. And so such economics is supposed to be economics of broad range. It will include economics of growth and development. You see, many people have been able to debate. We even have countries in the global world where they even come and sign treaties. they come and sign conventions, but they refuse to implement them, because some of those policies, they perceive them as being able to restrict. They're a bit restrictive with regard to development. So some of them will prioritize development of their countries. And if you tell them that, please shift to clean energy, and they imagine maybe clean energy may not have the power to drive their economy, they just refuse. Look at all that. So look at that. So we look at that broad range, like economics of growth and development, economics of industry. So how do industries work? Is it possible that there are certain policies, economic policies, that when you put them in place, industries may stop, or we might have a reduction in industries? We've had instances where such things are happening. Economics dealing with innovation and new technology. So look at economic policies around new technology, for example, institutions in the national economy, in the national market, for example, in the national trade. So if there are policies that are going to impede international relationships at that level, then I think there may policies around, economic policies around demography and migration. Look at all that. Those about public finance and how to use it. You can imagine with the Paris Agreement and the climate fund, for example, and the role of developed nations in supporting developing or least developed nations, and also the country's contribution to climate fund. So some countries are not able to donate funds into that fund, because maybe the little that they have, they put it in their national development, for example. And even rich countries sometimes, if you mandate them, or you persuade or ask them to contribute to helping least developed or developing countries, we might begin to look at all that. Information and uncertainty, environmental, economic policies, those are important things. So it requires in the national community to find a collective means by which they sit together and get a way forward, building a very clear international agreement that are important. So then how do we do this? So what would be an effective climate economics? So an effective climate economics would actually means like encompass what? Now, I think I've been able to mention a bit of that broad range, taking cognizance of the other issues. So building an effective global agreement requires a lot. If we were to have a shared understanding of the consequences of climate change, if we have that, and if we have a very clear content of the agreement in terms of what the agreement requires from each party, and then we also have very clear analysis of equity issues. So then this equity issue has caused problem. Like you say, we are an East African bloc, and we want to fight climate change, and we want to come up with economic policies among 6 or 7 nations of us. So look at equity issues coming clearly. Finding incentive structures to foster economic and social, political perspective. So you can imagine all those that are important. So features of effective climate economics would be around, we focus on cost reduction. So that is one major feature of an effective climate economics. It focuses on cost reduction through mitigation. It also focuses on risk reduction through, if we do very good scenario planning or future scenario planning, something like that. If we focus on implication of greenhouse gas emissions on growth, implication of that, greenhouse gas emissions. We also balance mitigation responses with economic growth. So it's not possible that it's possible that you have your budget and donate a huge chunk of it to mitigation when the development agenda of your state, your country remains unattended to. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. Examining the economics of technological options. Look at new technology and how we go about it. Calculating the social cost of carbon emission. So apart from economics of mitigation and economics of, let's say, early warning, economics of adaptation, we also have the social cost of climate change, for example. Look at that, the social cost of carbon emissions. So how do you factor that in? It also explores the carbon tax and other measures like market and other mitigation measures that we are talking about. We also develop international collective action plans, for example. Very clear. Is it possible that we can develop international action plans? We know very well that we have different contexts, and that's why the Paris Agreement gives us room for the nationally determined action plans. The only problem could be, so then who insists or who supervises that these things happen the way we envisage them to do? Who can take that responsibility of even ensuring that all countries that are party to treaties and conventions comply to them, for example? They also analyze individual country policy positions. Those are things. They also link local legislations with the global policies, as it were. So then the climate economics has to be very effective, and that the effectiveness can be increased through those are the focus areas that I've been able to mention. Lastly, let's talk about climate change and growth, and I think this is an issue that has come about a great deal, and that is one of the reasons why climate change concerns economists. All governments focus on the growth of their economies. It's no government that does not focus on the growth. They focus on health, environment, even culture, and even livelihoods, and even their populations. And so the growth of a country is to a large extent related with climate change. So they are a bit interrelated. So growth drives climate change. How is that possible? If you look at even developed countries, people are blaming developed countries as very responsible for the huge amount of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere, which has caused the climate change status that we are having today. So imagine a developing nation can take the development trajectory, or that path, so that they also develop. They have huge industries, very huge road infrastructure. They have those towering urbanism. You can imagine what amount of carbon dioxide they will be exuding. So look at that. So we are saying that growth drives climate change. So there is then high dependency on energy. Climate change affects growth in short, medium, and even long term. So climate change affects that. There's a way in which the impact of climate change can water down all the development efforts that you have put in place. People need to be a bit careful there. So the growth processes affect or involve people. So when a country or community or a region is growing, it's supposed to be involvement of people. And so climate change also comes to involve people in mitigating or adapting to the impact. Mitigation and adaptation affect growth. So equity demands that we respond to climate change without undermining or impeding growth. So much as we want to perform and say that we having very good adaptation, mitigation, we need to be very careful not to have them impede growth, because we need to have at least strategies or techniques that permit both adaptation and mitigation, as well as boosting development, if that is possible. And then the importance of adaptation, I think I also want to mention a bit of it. What is the importance of adaptation, for example? Adaptation reduces the impacts. Even as we mitigate, even as we endeavor to grow and develop, we also have mechanisms to get us to develop resilience, to get us to live with the impacts of climate change. So impacts are inevitable, because we already know that even if we were to actually mitigate the root causes of climate change fully, we are not out of the woods. The impact that we have in terms of the amount of carbon dioxide which is already in the atmosphere is supposed to last hundreds of years. And so climate change will be here with us even if. So one principle is that we also enhance adaptation. We support and promote adaptation. And adaptation is currently being supported, even at global levels. Look at what is espoused in Paris Agreement. Many regional organizations are already doing this. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, I want to stop there, and I want to just recap that I've been talking about today the economics of climate change, and one main question that I asked was that why should I be able to make presentation of this? So why are climate change issues concerning economists? What is economists doing in a climate change issue? I think I've been able to give you this in terms of contextualizing climate change, talking about what causes it, talking about the global warming, greenhouse gases, and I also went to give you the breakdown of the contribution of greenhouse gases, and I mentioned electricity generation, the energy sources, the land use changes, agriculture sector, and all that. And I went to give you a bit of what is espoused in the international interventions like United Nations General Assembly, World Meteorological Association, the UNFCCC. I kind of gave you that and some of the debate around that. And then we described the nature of climate economics. How is climate economic looking? And then look at all that. Then we went to looking at if it is supposed to be managed, so what is the scope? What is the scope of climate economics? I also mentioned that. And then I went to zero in on effective climate economic. How does an effective climate economic look like? And then the features that I have been able to mention. And then I tied the climate change to growth so that you see the connection between climate change and growth, and hence economics is coming. And then the importance of adaptation. And then lastly, some of the mitigation options. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to stop there. Let me stop there. And I want to still continue to encourage you to like, to share, and to subscribe to this channel. And this channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo Knowledge Hub. Thank you so much.